Welcome to our deep dive today. And, we're going to tackle a topic that might seem kind of dry at first, but trust me, it's anything but.
Okay.
We're talking about the big kahuna, the Supreme Court of the United States.
The Supreme Court.
Yeah, now you might be thinking 9 judges in robes. How exciting can that be? But here's the thing. These 9 people, they've got a power unlike any other in the country.
Yeah, they're shaping the fabric of American society through their interpretations of the Constitution and the impact of those decisions. I mean, it ripples through generations.
So let's unpack this a little bit. We always hear about the Supreme Court's power, but for someone who's not a legal expert, why should they really care about what these 9 people decide?
Well, you got to think about it this way. The Supreme Court's rulings, they don't just exist on paper, they directly impact your life.
Yeah.
Everything from your right to free speech to how elections are conducted, even your access to health care, all of these things can be influenced by the court's decisions.
Well, it's not just legal theory, it's real-world consequences.
Exactly.
I like that, yeah.
And what makes the Supreme Court even more interesting is its structure. So these justices, they're appointed for life, meaning they're insulated from the pressures of public opinion or running for office.
Right.
This allows them to take a long view on issues, but it also raises questions about accountability.
Yeah, it's kind of like a paradox, right? They have this huge power, but they're not really answerable to the people in the same way as, elected officials.
You hit the nail on the head, and that tension between power and accountability is something that's played out through the court's entire history.
So let's dive into that history a little bit, because it seems like there was a real turning point in the court's direction starting somewhere around the 1980s.
Absolutely. The rise of this conservative legal movement during the Reagan era had a profound impact on the Supreme Court.
A huge impact.
Conservative legal scholars, a lot of them associated with the Federalist Society, started to gain influence and push for this specific judicial philosophy focused on originalism and textualism.
Hold on, can we break that down for a second? What do those terms actually mean for people who aren't, lawyers?
Of course. So originalism basically means interpreting the Constitution based on what its framers originally intended. And textualism is the idea that judges should just focus on the text of the law rather than trying to read between the lines and find some hidden intent.
So it's all about sticking to the letter of the law as it was written.
Precisely. And this way of interpreting the law gained traction, particularly among conservatives who felt that the court had strayed too far from the Constitution's original meaning.
And this conservative legal movement, they had a very specific goal in mind, didn't they?
They absolutely did. Their goal was to reshape the court, appoint justices who shared their ideology, and would roll back what they saw as liberal judicial activism.
And one of the most, contentious battles in this whole war was over abortion.
Without a doubt, Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 decision that legalized abortion nationwide, became a lightning rod for both sides. Conservative legal activists saw it as a prime example of judicial overreach, and they were determined to overturn it.
So Roe v. Wade becomes this central point, this symbol of the larger fight over the court's direction.
Exactly, and it sets the stage for all these increasingly contentious battles over Supreme Court nominations, because each side wanted to appoint justices who would advance their agenda.
And then comes the Rehnquist Court, which really marks a shift in the court's makeup.
Yes. William Rehnquist, who had been this staunch conservative voice on the court for years, became Chief Justice in 1986, and over the next 2 decades, he presided over a court that, while not always agreeing on everything, began to move in a more conservative direction.
But even within this conservative shift, there were nuances, right? Like in the Dickerson v. United States case, where Rehnquist upheld Miranda rights, which you might not expect from a conservative justice.
That's a great example of how legal philosophy can be so complex.
Yeah.
Rehnquist, while conservative, was also a pragmatist. He believed in upholding precedent even when he personally might have disagreed with the original ruling. And in Miranda, he recognized its importance in protecting the rights of criminal defendants.
So it wasn't just a black and white situation, even on a court with a conservative lean.
Not at all. The court's decisions are often the result of complex legal reasoning and internal debates, with justices weighing all these different perspectives and precedents. Sometimes those decisions can really surprise us.
And speaking of surprises, Planned Parenthood v. Casey really shook things up. It really did. It looked like Roe v. Wade might actually get overturned, but then the court ultimately upheld its core holding.
Casey was a pivotal moment. The court now, with a more conservative majority than during Roe, had this opportunity to completely overturn abortion rights. But instead they came out with this nuanced decision that, while allowing for some restrictions on abortion, reaffirmed that fundamental right to choose.
And that decision really came down to just a few key justices, didn't it?
It did. Justices Kennedy, Sater, and O'Connor, they formed this unlikely alliance in Casey, voting to uphold the essence of Roe, while also giving states more leeway to regulate abortion.
Right.
It was a compromise that angered both sides of the debate, but it ultimately preserved a woman's right to choose.
And that compromise really shows the power that individual justices can have,
Yeah.
especially when they become like the swing vote on a closely divided court.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even on a court with a clear ideological leaning, there can be surprises and shifts depending on the specific case and the justices involved.
So Casey, while not overturning Roe, it certainly didn't settle the debate over abortion either.
No.
It feels like that issue has just continued to be a major battleground for the court.
You're absolutely right, and as we'll see, the court's composition continued to evolve, and with each new appointment, the stakes in this battle just got higher.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of a shifting court, a growing conservative legal movement, and the abortion debate is raging on. What happens next?
Well, next we enter a period where the court faces this series of landmark cases, from the 2000 election controversy to issues of national security and individual rights in the post-9/11 world.
Oh boy, this is where things get really interesting. Buckle up, listener, because we're about to dive into some of the most consequential decisions in recent Supreme Court history.
Let's talk about a case that really, I guess you could say, threw the Supreme Court right into the center of a political storm.
Oh, yeah.
Bush v. Gore. You remember the 2000 election, right?
Of course, yeah.
Hanging chads, recounts, and then ultimately a Supreme Court decision that basically decided the presidency.
It felt like the whole country was just holding its breath, waiting to see what the court would do. And that decision stopping that recount in Florida, It really left a mark on the court's reputation, didn't it?
It definitely did. Bush v. Gore was unprecedented in how much it impacted a presidential election. And it raised so many questions about what the court's role should be in a situation that's so politically charged. Some people argued that the court just overstepped its bounds, while others said that they were simply upholding the rule of law.
And this is all happening right as the newly appointed Chief Justice John Roberts came in. Talk about stepping into a pressure cooker.
John Roberts' appointment in 2005 marked the start of what we now call the Roberts Court, and right away it was clear that this court was going to be dealing with some of the most complex and divisive issues facing the country.
Roberts, during his confirmation hearings, really presented himself as this neutral umpire.
Yeah.
Just calling balls and strikes, as he put it.
It's interesting, that analogy of the umpire, isn't it? Because while the court wants to be impartial, the reality is that their decisions have this huge impact on shaping the law, not just interpreting it.
It's like saying that the umpire doesn't influence the game when they're the ones who decide what a strike is and what a ball is.
Exactly. And under Roberts, the court continued moving to the right, especially on issues like campaign finance, voting rights, and affirmative action. Cases like Citizens United v. FEC, which basically opened the floodgates for corporate money in elections, and Shelby County v. Holder, which gutted key parts of the Voting Rights Act. They really showed the court's power to reshape the political landscape.
Those cases really sparked a lot of debate about the role of money in politics and how we protect voting rights, especially for minority communities.
They sure did. And these debates are still going on today as we try to figure out the implications of those decisions and what they mean for the future of American democracy.
Let's shift gears a little and talk about another area where the Roberts Court has made a big impact: the Second Amendment and gun rights.
Okay.
The court's decision in District of Columbia v. Heller, the one that recognized an individual's right to own a gun for self-defense at home, was a major turning point in this whole gun control debate. It was the first time that the court had explicitly said that individuals have a right to bear arms, and that had this ripple effect on gun laws across the country.
Huge.
And that decision really energized the gun rights movement, didn't it? It seemed like all of a sudden every state legislature was talking about concealed carry and other gun-related laws.
Heller definitely had this galvanizing effect, and the court has continued to weigh in on gun rights, which has further solidified the Second Amendment as one of the most important parts of American law.
So we've talked about Roe, Bush v. Gore, Citizens United, Shelby County, Heller. I mean, these are some major cases, decisions that have changed everything from election law to gun rights to how we even define individual liberty.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that all these cases, even though they're about different things, they all reflect this bigger theme. The ongoing struggle to interpret the Constitution in a world that's constantly changing.
I'm like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. The Constitution was written centuries ago, and now it's being applied to issues that the framers couldn't have even imagined.
That's a great way to put it, and that's exactly why the Supreme Court is so important and why these 9 people have so much power. They're basically the guardians of the Constitution, you know? They have to figure out what it means and how it applies to the challenges we face today.
And as we move further into the 21st century, I mean, the challenges facing the court are just going to become even more complex.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Issues like technology, privacy, climate change, social justice, all of these things are going to need the court to step in and provide guidance and shape the legal landscape.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. From the rise of the conservative legal movement to the big decisions of the Roberts Court, we've seen how these 9 justices have dealt with some of the most important issues facing our nation. But there's one more area we need to talk about, and it's maybe the most personal of all. Individual rights.
Yes. The court's decisions on things like free speech, religious freedom, and the right to privacy have a direct impact on how we live our lives. They shape what we can say, believe, and do.
Yeah, and those boundaries are always being tested and redefined, especially in a society that's as diverse and dynamic as ours.
That's right. And that's why the Supreme Court's role in protecting those individual rights is so important. These rights are the foundation of a free and just society, and the court is their ultimate guardian.
So let's dive into some of the key cases that have shaped how we understand individual rights in America, starting with a decision that really sparked a revolution in the fight for LGBTQ plus equality. So we were just talking about the importance of individual rights and, the Supreme Court's role in protecting them. And one case that really stands out is Lawrence v. Texas. That was a huge decision, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Lawrence v. Texas struck down those sodomy laws that basically criminalize same-sex relationships. It was a major victory for the LGBTQ plus community and really marked a shift in how the court sees privacy rights and that right to personal autonomy.
And it wasn't just about overturning a law. It was about recognizing the dignity and equality of LGBTQ plus people.
Exactly. The court said that individuals have this right to make choices about their own private lives without being afraid of getting arrested.
Yeah.
It was a really powerful statement that opened the door for more victories later on, including legalizing a same-sex marriage.
It's incredible to think about how much progress has been made on LGBTQ plus rights in such a short amount of time. And the Supreme Court was a big part of that.
Definitely. Their rulings have helped to change public opinion and create a society that's more inclusive and fair.
So we've talked about LGBTQ plus rights, but what about religious freedom? There's so many other areas where the court has made decisions about individual rights.
Religious freedom is like a cornerstone of American democracy, and the court has this long history of dealing with really complex cases about the separation of church and state.
Those cases can get pretty tricky, can't they? Trying to balance the right to practice your religion with the need to prevent the government from establishing a religion.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. Cases about school prayer, religious displays on public property, government funding for religious institutions, they've all gone to the court. And the justices have to figure out where to draw the line.
And those lines can get really blurry as society changes.
Exactly. Think about the internet and social media. The court is now dealing with brand new challenges in trying to understand the First Amendment in this digital age. How do you protect free speech online while also dealing with hate speech and misinformation and the spread of harmful content?
Right.
Those are the questions that the court is wrestling with right now.
It's like the Constitution is alive, It's constantly being reinterpreted as the world changes.
That's a great point. And that's why studying the Supreme Court is so interesting. It's not just about knowing legal precedents. It's about understanding how our basic rights change and how the court helps shape those changes.
So we've covered so much in this deep dive, from the way the court is structured to its most important decisions on abortion, elections, gun rights, and personal freedoms. What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that even though the Supreme Court might seem far away from our daily lives, its decisions affect every one of us.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about healthcare, education, free speech, the right to marry, all of these things are impacted by the court's decisions. They shape the very fabric of American society.
And it's crucial for everyone to understand how the court works the different philosophies that shape their decisions and what impact those decisions have.
Yeah.
That's what it means to be an informed and engaged citizen.
You're exactly right. We can't just assume our rights will always be there. We have to be aware of the things that are constantly changing the legal landscape.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep engaging with the issues that are important to you, because the future of our democracy really does depend on it.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Supreme Court. We hope you found it helpful.
Absolutely. And as always, thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.